My name is Robert Chun, 58 years old. At 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in February, exactly 72 hours before my pension would vest after 32 years with Meridian Financial Services, HR called me into a conference room. "We're restructuring your department," Jeremy Walsh said, not meeting my eyes. By 5:15 p.m., I was walking to the glass doors of the downtown office building for the last time, carrying a banker's box containing 32 years of my life. I set the box on the passenger seat of my Honda and sat there in the parking garage for 10 minutes. Not crying, not angry, just processing. In 3 days, my pension would have vested. 32 years, 1 month, and 15 days of service would have guaranteed me $2.8 million over my retirement. Now I had a 401k worth $247,000 and whatever I could collect from unemployment. The security badge I just handed back had been my constant companion since 1990. I was 26 then, fresh off the boat from Taiwan with my engineering degree and determination. My father had died when I was 12, leaving my mother to raise 3 kids alone. She cleaned office buildings at night so I could go to school. This job at Meridian was supposed to be the promise fulfilled, the American dream realized. Meridian Financial Services wasn't just any company when I started. Founded in 1952, they specialize in conservative portfolio management for institutional clients. Good people, honest business, steady growth. I started as a junior analyst in the fixed income department, making $32,000 a year. I was grateful for every penny. I worked late, came in early, asked questions, and listened to everything. By 1995, I was managing my own small accounts. By 2000, I was overseeing middle-market pension funds. By 2010, I was senior portfolio manager for some of our largest clients, managing over $2 billion in assets. I'd survived the dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, budget cuts, and 4 different acquisitions. Through it all, I kept my head down and did good work. The company changed in 2020 when they brought in Marcus Whitfield as CEO. Harvard MBA, former Goldman Sachs vice president. One of those guys who talk about disruption and agility in every sentence. His first all-hands meeting, he called us legacy assets that needed to be optimized. I remember sitting in the back row, watching younger employees nod enthusiastically, while the veterans like me shifted uncomfortably in our seats. The changes started slowly. New performance metrics that favored digital fluency over experience. The company hired a consulting firm to evaluate our workflows. Younger analysts were brought in at 60% of what veterans were paid, but with fancier titles. Digital portfolio associate instead of junior analyst. Same job, different branding. Marcus introduced something called Stay Conversations, voluntary meetings where managers would discuss your career trajectory and future opportunities. Translation: pressure to take early retirement. Some of my colleagues took the bait. Jim Kowalski, 28 years with the company, took a package 6 months before his pension vested. Sarah Williams, 31 years, did the same thing. I didn't take the meetings. I kept my head down, managed my clients' money, and counted the days until my pension vested. February 18th, 2022. It was circled on my calendar, highlighted on my phone, memorized like my own birthday. The signs became impossible to ignore by fall 2021. My department head, Bob Richardson, a guy I'd worked with for 22 years, was promoted to a special projects role that meant nothing. They replaced him with Jeremy Walsh, 29 years old, MBA from Wharton, who'd worked at 2 private equity firms before joining Meridian. Jeremy's first department meeting was memorable. He stood at the head of our conference table wearing a $3,000 suit and told us about transformative changes and next-generation portfolio management. He used the word pivot 12 times in 20 minutes. I counted. When he asked if there were any questions, I stayed silent. 32 years had taught me when to speak and when to observe. The performance reviews changed under Jeremy. Suddenly, metrics I'd excelled at for decades were weighted less while new categories appeared. Technological adaptability, cross-platform integration, collaborative innovation mindset, I've been managing $2.3 billion in client assets with a 97% retention rate, but apparently I needed to improve my synergistic approach to stakeholder engagement. In November, Jeremy called me into his office for a one-on-one. He sat behind Bob Richardson's old desk, the one Bob had used for 15 years, and pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. "Robert," he said, trying to sound casual, "I've been reviewing our department's cost structure. Your compensation package is significant, especially with pension obligations." I nodded slowly. I understand the company has financial pressures. "We're not just talking about salary," he continued. "The pension liability you represent is substantial. Have you considered the voluntary retirement packages we're offering?" "I have," I said truthfully, "and I've decided to stay until my pension vests." Jeremy's smile tightened. "February 18th, right? Just a few months away." February 18th. I confirmed. That conversation changed something between us. Not openly, but you could feel it. Jeremy started excluding me from certain meetings. Emails about new client prospects stopped including me. He assigned my junior associates to shadow other senior managers for training. December brought our annual client review meetings. I've been running these for over a decade, detailed presentations showing performance, discussing strategy, maintaining the relationships that kept Meridian profitable. This year, Jeremy announced he'd be taking the lead on major client communications. Robert will provide technical support, he explained to the department. We're implementing a more streamlined approach to client relations. I watched from the corner as he stumbled through presentations I could have delivered in my sleep. Technical questions from clients were redirected to me, but Jeremy took credit for the answers. Our biggest client, the Municipal Workers' Pension Fund, $400 million under management, asked specifically to meet with me afterward. What's happening at Meridian? Frank Morrison, their fund manager, asked over coffee. Jeremy seemed unprepared. New leadership, new approaches, I said diplomatically. Frank studied me. You've been managing our money for 18 years, Robert. Our board trusts you, not some kid who can't explain why we're underweight in international bonds. That trust was something Marcus and Jeremy couldn't quantify on their spreadsheets. Relationships built over decades, confidence earned through multiple market cycles, loyalty cultivated through economic downturns. They saw these as inefficiencies rather than assets. January brought another company-wide restructuring announcement. Efficiency improvements, cost optimization, strategic workforce alignment, corporate speak for layoffs. The axe fell on my floor harder than others. 5 senior managers with combined experience of 127 years were let go, all within 18 months of pension vesting. I started documenting everything. Not Plan B or preparing for war, just good record keeping. I copied my client files to secure drives, saved emails in personal folders, and maintained detailed notes about account performance and client communications. 32 years had taught me the value of documentation. The end came suddenly, though I'd seen it building for months. Thursday morning, February 15th, started normally. I arrived at 7 a.m., reviewed overnight market reports, and prepared for the day. At 9:30, Jeremy's assistant called. Jeremy needs to see you in conference room B. Please bring your access cards and any company devices. Conference room B was on the executive floor. I'd never been called there before. I took the elevator up, walked down the marble hallway, and entered to find Jeremy sitting across from Susan Rivers, our head of HR. "Robert, please sit," Susan said, her voice professionally neutral. I sat and placed my hands flat on the polished table. 32 years had taught me to control my reactions. "Robert," Jeremy began, consulting a paper he obviously hadn't written himself, "we've been evaluating the department's structure and future needs. With the new direction we're taking, more algorithmic trading, automated portfolio management, digital-first client relations, we've determined that your position is no longer aligned with our strategic goals." I nodded once. "I understand." Susan slid a folder across the table. "This contains information about your separation package, severance based on standard company policy, COBRA information, and details about your 401k rollover options. I opened the folder, but didn't read it. I already knew what it would say. What about my pension? I vest on February 18th. Jeremy and Susan exchanged a glance. Unfortunately, Susan explained, pension vesting requires active employment on the vesting date. Since your position is eliminated before that date, my pension doesn't vest. I finished. That's correct, she confirmed. You'll receive information about converting any accrued benefits to your 401k. I closed the folder. I see. May I ask who will be handling my client relationships? Jeremy will personally oversee the transition, Susan said. We're confident in our ability to maintain continuity. I almost smiled. Jeremy couldn't explain the difference between duration and convexity, but he'd be managing $2.3 billion in institutional funds. I'll need you to gather your personal items and return all company property by the end of the day, Susan continued. Security will escort you to your desk. That won't be necessary, I said. I can find my way. I stood, shook their hands, and walked out. In the hallway, I passed Marcus Whitfield. He was on his phone, but caught my eye and nodded slightly. Not apologetic, just acknowledging a business transaction. 20 minutes later, I was at my desk, packing. 32 years compressed into a banker's box. Family photos. My coffee mug with the chip from when I dropped it celebrating our biggest client win in 2008. The award I'd received for exceptional performance during the 2001 recession. A small cactus my daughter had given me from my office. Somehow still alive after 8 years. Colleagues stopped by. The younger ones looked uncomfortable, the older ones knowing they might be next. Maria Santos, who'd worked with me for 15 years, hugged me goodbye. This is wrong, she whispered. You built half the portfolios in this building. It's business, I replied, though we both knew better. I finished packing by 5:15. The security guard, someone I'd said good morning to for 3 years, walked me to the elevator. Professional but kind, he pressed a button for the parking garage. Sorry, Mr. Chun, he said as the doors opened. Always enjoyed our chats. Take care, David, I replied. The elevator descended, and I realized that after 32 years, 1 month, and 15 days, I was unemployed. No pension, no clients, no office, no routine, just a Honda and a banker's box and the knowledge that I'd been systematically pushed out to save the company money. I drove home to our suburban house, the one Linda and I had bought in 1995 when I got my first promotion. She was at her book club, wouldn't be back until 9. I set the box on the kitchen counter and sat at our table. For the first time since the meeting, I felt anger. Not rage, not fury, just a cold, calculated anger that sharpened rather than clouded my thinking. 32 years, 3 days, $2.8 million. The numbers kept cycling through my mind. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my personal files. Everything was still there. 32 years of notes, correspondence, saved emails, performance data. I'd always been meticulous about documentation, partly from engineering training, partly from experience working with auditors and compliance teams. As I scrolled through files, patterns began emerging, things I'd noticed but never connected. The voluntary retirement packages offered to senior employees, the timing of terminations, the consulting firm that had evaluated our department, the new performance metrics that favored younger workers. I was 40 pages into a spreadsheet I'd maintained for my own records when I found it. A note from 18 months ago. Bob R. terminated 73 days before pension vesting. Below that, Sarah Williams terminated 95 days before vesting. Then, Jim Kowalski terminated 156 days before vesting. I scrolled back through the file. 5 more names. 8 total senior employees terminated within 4 months of pension vesting. Including me, it was 9. I calculated quickly. Rough numbers based on years of service and final salaries. $24.7 million in total pension obligations eliminated. Nearly $25 million saved by the company through timing terminations just before vesting. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't even poor judgment. This was systematic, planned, deliberate. I closed a laptop and walked to our kitchen window. Looking out at the street Linda and I had watched our children learn to ride bicycles on. We'd paid off the house 5 years ago. Both kids were through college, starting their own careers. Our retirement plan had been simple. My pension would cover our basic expenses, for a 1K and Social Security would handle the rest. Travel, visiting grandchildren, Linda's art classes. Now that plan was gone. I opened a bottle of wine, the good stuff Linda saved for special occasions, and poured a glass. Then I picked up my personal phone and scrolled through contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Eleanor Martinez, former colleague, former friend, former fellow survivor of the 2008 downturn when we'd worked 18-hour days, keeping client accounts stable. Eleanor had left Meridian 5 years ago for a position with the Department of Labor's Employee Benefit Security Administration. She'd tried to recruit me twice. Both times I declined, loyal to Meridian. I looked at her number for a long time before dialing. It rang 3 times. Robert Chun, Eleanor's familiar voice said, "What a surprise. How are you? How's Meridian treating you?" "Poorly," I said. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet?" Eleanor's voice changed, becoming professionally concerned. "What happened?" "They fired me. Today. 3 days before my pension vested." Silence on the line. Then, son of a bitch. "Robert, listen carefully. Can you come to D.C. tomorrow? I need to see everything you have." "Everything meaning what?" "Everything, Robert. Files, emails, documentation. Everything. Because of what I think is happening actually happened. Meridian has a much bigger problem than they realize. And we're going to make sure they understand that." I hung up and made a reservation for the 6 a.m. flight to D.C. Then I spent the night copying every relevant file I had onto multiple drives, organizing them by date and department. By morning, I had 3 things: a suitcase, a laptop bag full of evidence, and the beginning of a plan. The phone call to Eleanor had changed everything. Meridian thought they'd eliminated a problem. Instead, they created a much bigger one. As the plane lifted off from Columbus, carrying me toward Washington, D.C., I realized that for the first time in 32 years, I wasn't thinking about portfolio management or client relations or performance metrics. I was thinking about justice. The captain announced we'd reached cruising altitude. I opened my laptop and began writing. Every detail, every conversation, every calculation. 32 years of institutional knowledge was about to be put to use in ways Meridian never anticipated. I had made that phone call, and now everything would change. I landed at Reagan National 11:30 a.m., carrying 2 laptops and enough evidence to fill a small filing cabinet. Eleanor was waiting for me at baggage claim, looking exactly like she had 5 years ago. Sharp suit, knowing eyes, and a coffee cup that had seen better days. "You look terrible," she said, not unkindly. "I feel terrible," I admitted. She drove straight to the Department of Labor building in downtown D.C. During the 40-minute ride through Washington traffic, I gave her the details. The 9 senior employees terminated before pension vesting. The consulting firm. Jeremy's obvious inexperience. The timing that was too perfect to be coincidental. "Robert," she said, pulling into the federal building parking garage, "I'm going to show you something that's going to make you very angry." Eleanor's office was on the 7th floor of a building that looked like every federal office building in Washington. Efficient, functional, and slightly worn. She cleared security for me and led me through corridors lined with inspirational government posters about workplace rights. "Coffee?" she offered, settling behind a desk covered with case files. "Please." She handed me a thick folder. "This is a Meridian file." "You already have a file on them?" "We've had complaints. 3 in the past 18 months. All age workers. All terminated close to pension vesting. But they came individually, and we couldn't establish a pattern." I opened the folder. 3 names I recognized: Martha Davidson, Paul Rivera, and Sandra Kim. All former colleagues. All terminated within 120 days of pension vesting. "Sandra Kim," I said slowly. "I trained her when she started. 29 years with the company. They told me she left for family reasons. She didn't leave. She was terminated. Her performance review mentioned difficulty adapting to new technologies and resistance to changing methodologies. I looked up at Eleanor. Sandra was one of our best analysts. She spoke 4 languages and specialized in emerging markets. The new technologies they mentioned were collaboration apps that did the same things as email. Eleanor nodded grimly. Here's what's interesting. Each of these 3 hired the same law firm. Mid-tier employment law practice. They filed age discrimination complaints, but couldn't prove systematic targeting. Meridian paid modest settlements with non-disclosure agreements. How much? $50,000 to $60,000 each. Enough to make the problem go away, not enough to attract attention. I set down the folder. That's nothing compared to the pension savings. Exactly. Martha Davidson's pension would have been worth $1.8 million. They paid her $58,000 to disappear quietly. She pulled out another file. Now show me what you brought. I connected my laptop to her monitor and opened my documentation. Her expression grew darker as I walked to the patterns I'd identified. The timing, the sudden policy changes, the performance metrics designed to fail older workers. Jesus, Robert, this is systematic age discrimination on a massive scale. She picked up her phone. I'm calling the investigative unit. We need to brief them immediately. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room with 3 federal investigators. Eleanor had briefed them while I organized my files. Lead investigator was a woman named Janet Williams. No relation to the Sandra Williams at Meridian, who looked like she'd seen every type of corporate fraud imaginable and was tired of all of it. Mr. Chun, Janet began, tell us about the consulting firm. Bain Strategic Solutions. They came in about 8 months ago, officially for workforce optimization. Who authorized hiring them? Marcus Whitfield, the CEO. But the project was managed by Jeremy Walsh and Susan Rivers. Janet made notes. Did you have any interaction with consultants? Limited. They conducted interviews about our processes and observed our work. They seemed particularly interested in who was approaching retirement. Approaching retirement, she repeated. Or approaching pension vesting? The question hung in the air. I'd never made that connection explicitly, but now it seemed obvious. They asked about years of service, about future plans, about pension eligibility. The second investigator, a thin man named David Park, leaned forward. We need to see the Bain contract, the scope of work, any deliverables. I don't have access to those, I admitted. We'll subpoena them, Janet said calmly, along with HR records, termination documentation, and pension data. Eleanor, what's your take on the pattern? Eleanor spread out a timeline she created while I was talking. 9 senior employees terminated within 120 days of pension vesting. Combined pension savings to the company, approximately $24.7 million. That's not coincidence. That's strategy. Janet studied the timeline. Mr. Chun, are you willing to testify about what you've experienced? Yes. Are you willing to help us contact other victims? I thought about Martha, Paul, Sandra, good people who'd given decades to a company that discarded them for financial gain. Yes. Good. Because we're opening a formal investigation. Age discrimination. Potential ERISA violations. Conspiracy to defraud employees of pension benefits. She looked at David. Contact the FBI's white-collar crime unit. This is big enough to warrant joint task force status. The next week passed in a blur. I stayed in D.C., working with the investigators. We built a comprehensive database of terminated employees, cross-referencing with pension vesting dates. The pattern was undeniable. Then Eleanor called with news that changed everything. Remember how I said I needed to check something about Bain Strategic Solutions? Yes. They're owned by a holding company called Prestige Management Group. Guess who sits on Prestige's board of directors? I waited. Carl Morrison, former Meridian CFO. He left Meridian 18 months ago, right when the termination started accelerating. I sat down heavily. So this wasn't just age discrimination. This was insider knowledge being monetized. Carl knew everyone's pension vesting dates because he had helped design the pension plan. It gets better. Bain has contracts with 6 other companies, all similar patterns, all hitting older employees just before major benefit cliff dates. The investigation expanded rapidly. Federal agents interviewed current and former Meridian employees. Subpoenas flew. The SEC opened a parallel investigation focused on whether Meridian had properly disclosed the impact of pension obligation reduction on their financial statements. 3 weeks after my phone call to Eleanor, agents served search warrants on Meridian's offices. I watched the news coverage from Eleanor's living room, seeing FBI agents carrying boxes out of the building where I'd spent 32 years. My cell phone rang during the broadcast. Jeremy Walsh's name appeared on the screen. I almost laughed. "Hello, Jeremy." "Robert, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding about your termination." "A misunderstanding?" "We might have been hasty. If you're willing to return, we could discuss a position that would allow your pension to vest retroactively." I looked at Eleanor, who was listening on speakerphone. She made a "keep talking" gesture. "That's interesting, Jeremy. What position did you have in mind?" "Senior advisor role, consultant status. We could backdate it to cover your vesting period." "Jeremy, I have a question. Did you discuss this offer with Marcus, with the board, or with the FBI agents who are currently in your building?" Silence. Then, "Robert, please. We can make this right." "You're right, Jeremy. Someone is going to make this right, but it won't be you." I hung up and immediately called Janet Williams. They just offered to reinstate me retroactively to save my pension. I reported. "That's constructive admission of wrongdoing," she said. "We'll add it to the evidence pile." A month later, the indictments came down. Marcus Whitfield, Jeremy Walsh, and Susan Rivers were charged with age discrimination, conspiracy to violate ERISA, and wire fraud. Carl Morrison was indicted for his role in providing inside information to facilitate the scheme. But the bombshell came when agents executed a search warrant on Bain Strategic Solutions. They found a detailed playbook called Optimizing Workforce Costs Through Strategic Separations. It laid out exactly how to identify high pension employees, document performance issues, and time terminations to avoid pension vesting while maintaining legal deniability. The playbook also revealed the full scope. 17 companies, 847 terminated employees, over $400 million in optimized pension costs. Bain's fees were based on percentage of savings achieved, making them directly complicit in the fraud. Eleanor joined me for the press conference where federal prosecutors announced the charges. Standing at the podium, U.S. Attorney Sarah Martinez explained the case to assembled reporters. "This represents the largest organized attack on employee pension rights we've ever investigated. These weren't individual cases of age discrimination. This was a calculated scheme to defraud workers of benefits they had earned through decades of loyal service." A reporter asked about individual damages. "The affected employees didn't just lose their jobs," Martinez continued. "They lost their financial security, their retirement dignity, their faith in the system that was supposed to protect them." I testified before a grand jury, recounting my 32 years at Meridian and the systematic targeting of senior employees. I testified about watching good people pressured into early retirement, about Jeremy Walsh's incompetence being rewarded while experienced professionals were discarded. The victims started coming forward in larger numbers once the story broke, not just from Meridian, but from all 17 companies identified in the Bain playbook. Together, we filed a class action lawsuit seeking full pension restoration, punitive damages, and systemic reforms. Martha Davidson called me 2 weeks after the indictments. She was crying. "Robert, I knew something was wrong. I felt it, but I couldn't prove anything. They made me feel like I was just bitter, just couldn't adapt to change." "You weren't bitter, Martha. You were right. My husband died last year. The settlement money is gone. If I'd had my pension..." I couldn't finish that sentence for her, but I understood. Medical bills, care facilities, the financial security she'd earned over 29 years, stolen by people who saw her as a line item to be optimized. The trial began 6 months later. I was the lead witness, testifying for 3 days about the history of systematic targeting. Jeremy Walsh's lawyer tried to portray me as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. "Mr. Chun," he asked during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you were simply unable to adapt to modern portfolio management techniques?" "Counselor, I was managing $2.3 billion in client assets with a 98.4% retention rate. If that's considered poor adaptation to modern techniques, I would suggest examining what those techniques actually achieved." The prosecutor, on redirect, asked me to elaborate. When I was terminated, my accounts were immediately transferred to Mr. Walsh. Within 6 months, we lost 3 major clients totaling $740 million in assets under management. The clients cited concerns about experience and competency, and those concerned clients were the Municipal Workers Pension Fund, the Ohio Teachers Retirement System, and the Cincinnati Healthcare Union Retirement Plan. All expressed specific disappointment that I would no longer be managing their accounts. All moved their assets to competing firms. The courtroom was silent. Even Jeremy's lawyer looked uncomfortable. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all charges. Marcus Whitfield was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $47 million in restitution. Jeremy Walsh got 5 years. Susan Rivers got 3 years and a $5 million fine. Carl Morrison received 6 years for conspiracy and wire fraud. But the real victory came from the civil case. Federal Judge Patricia Romano approved a settlement requiring full pension restoration for all affected employees, punitive damages totaling $340 million, mandatory implementation of pension protection policies, independent oversight of benefit decisions at all 17 companies, personal liability for executives who participate in similar schemes. I received my full pension plus 18 additional months' worth as compensation for the delayed vesting. My pension was worth $3.1 million, more than I would have received originally due to the additional time and damages. Linda and I were finally able to retire properly, but retirement wasn't the end of this story. I started working with Eleanor as a volunteer consultant, helping identify similar patterns at other companies. Congress passed the Pension Protection Act of 2023, creating stronger criminal penalties for benefits fraud and requiring independent oversight of any termination made within 180 days of vesting. 6 months after the verdicts, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell our story. The film, called Optimize, premiered at Sundance and was later acquired by a major streaming service. All proceeds were donated to a fund helping workers fight age discrimination. Jeremy Walsh wrote to me from federal prison 2 years into his sentence. A short note saying he'd had time to think about what he'd done, that he was sorry, that he hoped to make amends somehow. I didn't reply. Some things can't be undone with apologies. But one thing surprised me. Meridian Financial Services never recovered from the scandal. Within 2 years, they were acquired by a larger firm. The Meridian name was retired. The building where I'd spent 32 years was sold and converted to condominiums. Sometimes I drive past it. Linda and I were house hunting in that neighborhood. We liked the old architecture. When I saw the building, I pointed it out to her. "That's where I worked," I said. She squeezed my hand. "That's where you survived," she corrected. On sunny afternoons, I volunteer at a legal aid clinic specializing in workers' rights. Last week, a 61-year-old engineer came in with a familiar story. Terminated 6 weeks before his pension vested. Company claimed performance issues. He had documentation showing a pattern. I handed him Eleanor's card. "Make this phone call," I told him. "Tell her Robert Chun suggested you contact her." As he left, clutching the car like a lifeline, I remember that February afternoon when I made my own phone call to Eleanor. 32 years of work almost erased in a 30-minute meeting. A $2.8 million pension eliminated with corporate doublespeak about strategic realignment. One phone call changed everything. Not just for me, but for hundreds of other workers who might have been targeted. For companies that now have to think twice before stealing their employees' futures. for federal enforcers who take these cases seriously. I've been retired for 3 years now. Linda and I travel. We visited our son in Seattle, our daughter in Austin. We take art classes together. She's still better than me, but I'm improving. We volunteer at the local food bank. We have the retirement we planned for, the one we earned. But I still think about that February afternoon, about the choice between accepting what happened or fighting back, about how easy it would have been to take the 401k money and walk away quietly, broken but uncomplaining. Instead, I made a phone call, one phone call, to the right person, at the right time, with the right evidence. 32 years of loyalty was betrayed in 30 minutes, but 50 years of friendship, professional relationships, and doing the right thing prevailed in the end. That's the lesson I share with other workers who contact me. Document everything. Trust your instincts. Find the right allies. And never underestimate the power of making that one crucial phone call. Sometimes justice delayed isn't justice denied. Sometimes it's just justice carefully prepared. My name is Robert Chun. I'm 61 years old. 3 years ago, I was fired 3 days before my pension vested after 32 years with Meridian Financial Services. I made a phone call, and in the end, that made all the difference.